Hello again, Norm here. Thank you very much for joining. Pull up a chair, help yourself to a bacon-wrapped cocktail wiener, and prepare yourself for a chat. As of this recording, it is early March, which in these parts means that it's ugly but warmer. The landscape is still about 70 different shades of mud. Skies are intermittently cloudy, or that not quite right Twilight Zone shade of late winter sunlight that's still coming at just enough of an oblong angle to still be depressing. But spring is coming, there is no doubt about that. There are Easter lilies blooming on the hills. Easter lilies are one of the signature early signs of spring in these parts, mostly because they're really the only flower that blooms right now. So you got a field of absolute dead muck, and then these very nice white and yellow Sunday go-to-meeting flowers coming up. Many of the old folks in the area consider them a ray of sunshine, a promise of spring to come. I consider them a cruel tease, and I shutter my windows at them. I'll be back outside in early May. Okay, let's see, what else is going on right now? Well, because the internet is for nothing if not oversharing, allow me to regale you with a tale of my own personal foibles. Now, you folks, I assume that some of you, at the very least, have been on a diet before. I think it's a safe bet, largely American audience, median audience age ever ticking upwards. I feel it's pretty safe to assume that at least some of you are aware of the feeling of wanting to be a little bit less fat. Just a little bit. And because of that, I am almost equally certain that some of you also know the sinking feeling of giving in to shameful temptation while on a diet. You're cruising along well for a couple weeks, the bathroom scale is nudging just closer to the low end than the high end, and then evening comes on, you start thinking about dinner, and then one tiny momentary lapse of judgment later, you're splayed out on the sofa, sweating out what is almost pure oil from a 7-meat pizza, stuffed full of Italian sausage and regret. And that's not the worst of it, because you got a pizza. You didn't get like a chicken sandwich or a cheeseburger where you could just wad up the remnants and throw them away. You've probably got leftovers, or even worse, maybe you don't have leftovers. But what you do have is a giant cardboard pizza box that's going to stay in your field of vision until the next garbage day, a constant visual reminder of just what a disgusting failure you are. Okay, so yeah, I assume some of you know this feeling. If you don't know this feeling, then be a good kid and keep it to yourself. At any rate, at this point you've probably got a pretty fair idea of where this story is heading. Except I did not get a pizza. No, what I did get in a fit of utter madness, you know those giant plastic Costco-type barrels of Utz Cheeseballs? Uh-huh. Didn't even walk into a store for them. I imagine if it was a choice of going into a store, I probably would not have had the wherewithal to make this purchase in front of a live human. Instead, it's a late night, I'm watching a Godzilla movie. My subconscious just reaches out and does a inventory of savory snacks I could be eating right now. The iPad is in dangerous proximity. Anyway, long story short, giant plastic barrel of Utz Cheeseballs. It was sitting out on the kitchen table for a few days before I realized that I was like grabbing a handful out every time I walked past. Like the size of this thing, I assume you've seen these before, but if you haven't had them close up to you, you could bury Peter Dinklage in one of these things. And in just the span of a couple days, the amount of cheese balls inside the barrel had gone down about an eighth, which is like crisis hotline levels of consumption. Like my blood will test positive for cheese powder 8 years from now. This is true, I ended up hiding it in a corner with a bag on top of it. Out of sight, out of mind, until I get some kind of craving for cheese balls, in which case, wham, right back into it like a starving raccoon. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, is knowing that sometime dangerously soon, I'm going to have to deal with a giant, empty barrel that once housed cheese balls. At that point, do I continue to play the farce and put it into a bag that's almost the same size as it, or do I just set it out with the rest of the garbage cans, letting the whole world take a good steamy gawk in my business? I suppose that's a concern for another day. So for now, thank you, the rest of the world, for listening in on my business. Okay, so what else is happening? Oh, fairly big deal here. You're probably already aware of it. But this past Wednesday, Bethesda finally announced not just the date for their upcoming Starfield dedicated showcase, but the actual, official, presumably final release date for Starfield itself. That's going to be on September 6, 2023, which does technically represent one more delay, a second delay. Originally delayed last year from November 11th, 2022 to the first half of the year, 2023. I've seen a few YouTube reports trying to make a big deal out of it, but the prevailing emotion has largely been, Because while this does technically represent a second delay for the game, the first delay did not have a definite release date attached to it. It just said the first half of the year. And while, yes, it does represent very poor judgment on their part to say that they're coming out in the first half of the year without having a definite release date on the books, it was also kind of smart of them, because that meant that the only way that we know that there was a delay is by doing basic math. That's right, the American education system left them a loophole. In point of fact, I noticed during they released a trailer, about a 2-minute long trailer with a little new footage of Starfield, and then Bethesda head Todd Howard talking about how excited they are to get the chance to show off the game. I noticed in that trailer at no point did they actually use the words delay. They didn't say that they were delaying the game, they just gave the dates. And it seems to have worked. Like I said, the prevailing sentiment regarding the delay is mostly that people are just happy to actually have the date available to them now. Just goes to show you a good life lesson in corporate America. Sometimes avoiding being stoned to death is as simple as not handing people the rocks. So yes, we are now officially inside what I have seen other YouTubers refer to as a 6-month marketing cycle for Starfield. And I personally hope that's true because, given what we know about Bethesda and their typical marketing methods, I think it's just as likely that what we're actually in is a 3-month cycle of absolute silence leading up to the June reveal show, the June Starfield showcase, followed by a 3-month marketing cycle. Bethesda is traditionally pretty close-lipped about their projects. Fallout 4, for instance, while it had been leaked by unauthorized sources sometime earlier, was not officially announced until the E3 of the year that it was released. Basically just 5 months of Bethesda even acknowledging its existence prior to release. And yes, that protocol was already broken with the announcement of Starfield and Elder Scrolls back in 2018, was it? Yes, 2018. It was kind of widely acknowledged that they didn't do that without some ulterior motives. Both Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6 were announced at the same press conference that Bethesda announced the impending release of Fallout 76. And at the time, Bethesda would have been acutely aware of a couple things. The first one being that Fallout 76 represented a dramatic departure from what they traditionally did as a studio, a live service survival title from a company that usually makes single-player RPGs. And the second thing they would have been acutely aware of that the public at that time was not, was just how badly Fallout 76 in its initial form sucked. And so while I am certain that they would have preferred not to announce Starfield or Elder Scrolls 6 at that time, we can sort of infer that it was a survival tactic. Basically something to keep them from getting torn limb from limb by people who felt betrayed by the company that had just a couple months previously put out a kind of self-congratulating, we're-defending single-player commercial starring Linda Carter. Not only were they delaying any real games to release a live service game, it was also going to prove to be one of the worst live service games on the market. So yeah, while they would have preferred to have held off on those announcements, I am 100% certain they knew for their own safety they needed the reassurance that there was going to be a traditional single-player RPG on the horizon. Anyway, so yes, Starfield is technically delayed again. Disappointed, not particularly surprised. As has been noted elsewhere, the smart money was that they were going to release Redfall before Starfield, and with Redfall coming out in May, that really only left June as a plausible first half of the year release, and June is traditionally a terrible time to release a game. If nothing else comes of this, I imagine you'll see less of the "we're going to release everything you see here within the next so many months" type of presentation from here out. Delays, particularly within the AAA landscape, are just going to be a fact of life from here out. Any solid commitments more than a year out from release are really just an invitation to injury at this point. But as noted, whether it's just from general tolerance or poor arithmetic skills, most people have taken the Starfield delay in stride. I have seen the usual selection of outraged YouTube headlines: "Starfield delayed again," "Bethesda, why do they suck?" And for the most part, if you actually watch those videos, the headlines usually just turn out to be just kind of clickbaity taglines at odds with the actual video content. At this point, it's kind of hard to be genuinely incredulous at a video game delay, like somebody genuinely standing out on a street corner in disbelief. Why would they delay it again? Well, the answer to that fairly obviously is because it needed delayed again. It sucks, but that's kind of the nature of making something that hasn't been made before. There is no single book in the library you can check out that is How to Make Cutting-Edge Games 2023 edition. Video games in general are an endeavor with about 1 million moving parts that are constantly being upgraded and replaced. I've said it before, but the fact that any video game actually works is pretty near a miracle. Actually, I would like to address one thing here, because I've seen it mentioned a couple of times in various of the Starfield analysis, particularly more towards back last summer during the E3 presentation when they showed off the initial gameplay reveal. There are a lot of people who dunk on Bethesda, specifically Bethesda, as being kind of this technologically backwards company. Well, I shouldn't say company, studio. I'm talking very specifically about the Rockville, Maryland Bethesda game studios that made Skyrim, Oblivion, Fallout. It is absolutely true that Bethesda games typically have a lot of bugs at launch, but also in general. If you boot up Skyrim now, you're still going to get the occasional crash or city guard swimming nonchalantly in midair. You'll get frame rate dips, you'll get strange behavior from NPCs, and inevitably you get people who look at this stuff versus like a highly polished game like the Uncharted series or The Last of Us, and they'll point fingers and they'll look incredulously at the camera because to them it's an open and shut case. One game is polished to a shine, stable frame rates, NPCs never where they shouldn't be, and then they look over and they see the Bethesda game and it's looking like the deck on the Titanic where they keep all the Irish people. An absolute twisted mass of incoherent mumbling, strangely gyrating bodies, junk everywhere, a pig on the ceiling, and on a surface level you can absolutely see their point. They represent a significant portion of the gaming public who aren't particularly well informed about the processes of video game making. Basically just consider the difference between games like Spider-Man and Starfield as just two different implementations of the same arcane magic. To them, it's a cut and dried issue. One game works well, the other does not. What is a little unusual is when you see these same takes coming out of people who are more familiar with the processes. That's not to say that the criticism isn't valid on at least that level, but there should be at least some effort to educate the listening audience on the mitigating factors, if for no other reason than in service of video games that do attempt to be more ambitious than straight action titles. Yes, The Last of Us is a much more polished game, but it also has a lot less going on under the hood. It can afford to spend its time making sure that individual grain sack animations are polished versus getting 100 individual procedural and tracking systems working together in such a fashion that they don't immediately crash the game every time they activate. I've noted it before, but one of the big reasons that you don't see the goofy NPC glitches of Bethesda games in other titles is not because the non-Bethesda NPCs are smarter, but because they're actually much, much dumber with much simpler scripts. Now, conversely, I've actually seen some fairly optimistic people saying that the reason that the second delay occurred was because Microsoft mandated it to give them more time to make the game as polished as a Naughty Dog release. And you know what? Godspeed to you, sweet summer child. I can dash that hope right there. Starfield is going to have bugs. It's going to have a lot of bugs. Even with nearly an extra year of polish, it's going to have a lot of bugs. Realistically, Starfield can guarantee no bugs in their game, no more than ChatGPT can guarantee their chatbot isn't going to repeat some insane made-up thing about Alexander Hamilton. And it's going to be largely for the same reason. The more complex the system, the more unexpected results. Those unexpected results are one of the big reasons that Bethesda games are as engaging as they are. The chance of being in a fight with bandits and then randomly some mammoth comes out of nowhere and tramples them. Anyway, I'm spending too much time on this. Long story short, there are still going to be bugs. Okay, well, I think we've spent long enough on Starfield right now. And because we are running out of time, I'm going to finish today's broadcast off with a couple more interesting facts. Fact number 1. Did you know that most commercial lipsticks contain a shimmering substance known as pearl essence? Sounds pretty glamorous, right? Pearl essence is actually just a very polite, cleaned up name for ground up fish scales. That's right, some guy was just out looking at the water, probably saw a fish carcass floating around, maybe half buried in the sand on shore, saw the way the scales caught the light, and thought to himself, I should smear that on a lady's mouth. That man was Max Factor. Okay, no, the anecdote is incorrect. That's just something I just made up. But the fish scales thing, that is real. So if you're ever buying a consumer product and you wonder if there's ever a greater amount of thought that goes into something like cosmetics, where some random substance in nature will give you the aesthetic effect you're looking for, regardless of how gross it is, don't kid yourself. We are all of us out here kissing fish. Finally, last fact. Most of us know Colonel Harlan Sanders as the distinctive face of the Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant franchise, but did you know that he also had a very brief career as a midwife? That's right, when he wasn't delivering extra crispy chicken to the masses, he was delivering approximately 8 babies in Kentucky. This was just one in a long string of jobs for Colonel Sanders before he hit on fame and fortune as a chicken magnate. In fact, if you are intrigued by this episode of his life, you should look up his full biography, which reveals that he was basically nuttier than an outhouse rat. Once got in a gunfight with a competing gas station owner. Anyway, not going to get into that today. Relevant thing, he was a midwife. Did the chicken grease make the process easier? It's not documented. In any case, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed our little escapade today, then please like, comment, subscribe. Do hit the notifications button if you have not already. Basically anything to let YouTube know that you like the content. Alternately, you can support us directly on patreon.com. The link is in the description. Until next time, stay healthy and we'll be back at you. Norm out. Like the video gamers? We have more such wonders to show you, and all you have to do is subscribe and hit the notifications button.
I mean, you don't have to.
Also consider becoming a patron by following the link to our Patreon page, where we turn your cash into videos, comics, and games using the darkest of dark magics.
But mostly just cash.